Hi guys. So there's quite a few passages in First Peter that stuck out to me regarding these themes of exile and land. And the first one is in um, chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. This is where he's directly addressing them. And he says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." And we know from the introduction of the book that these early believers had been scattered throughout all of what is now modern day Turkey. But they were in places that were not familiar to them. They would have had no sense of home. Home is important, and especially to these believers, land was important, and that feeling of being a part of the land that they grew up in, being a part of their culture. And now they've been dispersed and divided. In those verses we just read, 2, 9, and 10, Peter's reminding the believers that they're now a part of God's kingdom. They're a part of something so much greater. We've been made a holy nation. It says a royal priesthood, a chosen race. Basically, Peter's reminding these believers that though they're scattered, though they have no place of their own, that God has called them to something greater, and that they are a nation, that they do have something to root themselves in, and that is the fact that they have been saved by God. And because of that, if we read further in 11 and 12, he tells believers, and this applies to us as well, going through things, struggles, how we should live our lives. He says in verse 11, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So even though these believers would have been exiled and living in just terrible circumstances and situations, afraid for their lives, afraid for just getting back to normal, God has called them to live lives that are honorable. They're still called to be a testimony. And I think that's important for us to note, that even when things get tough in our lives, God has called us to be a testimony to people. Specifically for these believers, they were under the rule of nations that they probably didn't agree with their politics. And I think this is very relevant for us today. Verses 13 through 17, they say, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor." And that freedom he's talking about is not people who are free to live how they want. Obviously, these people are in exile and they're not free. But what he means is we as believers are to live as live like we're free, because we're free in Christ. These people, even though they've been exiled and are in a lands or multiple lands that are not their own, have a freedom that they is in Christ. They're still free, even though they're, I guess, free in spirit, even though they're captive in the flesh. And they need to realize that. And even though it might be tough, they need to honor the emperor. And like I said, I think this applies to us today, because there are many who disagree with different politicians and different things that they say for us to do, but we're called here to, it says honor the emperor. Now, honor doesn't always mean that we respect the person, but we need to show due honor to the people who are in charge. We need to bring them the dues that they are owed. We need to pay them the. I mean, it's hard to not use the word respect, but respect and honor are different. But you just give to them what they're due. You play the role that you're supposed to. So when it comes to the President of the United States. Some of us may or may not agree with him, or may not like what he has to say or do. We may not like any other ruler in our life, whether it's a local politician or governors, mayors, different things. Especially now, like I said, nowadays with governors making all these kinds of orders, we might not like what they're doing, but they're still owed honor. And that's what we need to do as believers. And when we honor them, that'll stick out to the rest of the world, and they'll see a difference in us. And I think that that's important for all of us to know. Verse 18, this one just personally stuck out to me a while ago when I was reading through 1 Peter. And it says, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust." Now, that stuck out to me because I was going through a time where I was working for my dad, and we were going through a lot of issues, and it was a really hard time just working for him. I worked for him for a few years, and we would, go up and down, but he would at times be what he would call, an unjust boss, I guess, or an unjust master. And I remember reading this verse and that sticking out to me, that even in situations where we feel like we're in an unjust situation, or where someone is being unjust to us, we're still called to, it says, be subject to your masters with all respect. And that's important that we note that. As far as it depends on us, we need to serve our bosses, our earthly masters, the people who have been put over us, even if they don't treat us right. Now, that doesn't mean to stay in an abusive situation or anything like that, but if it's up to you and it's not a terrible situation and someone's just being unreasonable, I think that we are called to live a life that looks different than how the world would live. And then the last section here that I had was chapter 5, verse 6. And this is, I think, the application that we all should take as believers in situations of trials and struggles. And that is that Peter says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you." It's important for us to be humble in situations that we're dealing with that, just our trials and struggles and things like that. These, early Christians were in exile. That's one of the themes of this topic. And in their exile, they were supposed to humble themselves. I mean, think about that. They've already been humbled so much, being taken out of their land, and yet Peter's calling them to humble themselves even more. Because, though, we all have the hope that we're going to be exalted one day. It says at the proper time, God will exalt them. And in the same way, he'll exalt us one day if we humble ourselves here on earth for the here and now. So I guess an encouragement to everyone is to just be humble in situations that look hard. Just stay focused on God. Stay focused on the fact that he's called us to something greater. And he's called us his children. We're part of his kingdom and his nation. And that should be our first and foremost identity, is people rooted in God and rooted in the promises that he has made for us. And we have the hope that one day, even if we're going through struggles and trials, he will exalt us. He will call us to something greater, and we'll get to experience that with him.